Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we continue our season previews with none other than the Georgia Bulldogs. Can they repeat in the SEC? Can they take it a step further and win Kirby Smart's third national championship? We shall see. But first, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. Be sure to follow us on our social medias. The links to those will be down in the description below. It helps the channel out a lot. And now, let's look at Georgia's schedule this year. The Bulldogs have about the average SEC schedule with a decently lenient road schedule, specifically Tennessee, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Georgia Tech all on the road, with a neutral site against Florida mixed in there. Definitely not the worst away slate we've seen thus far, but at home, they'll have Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas. All difficult games, but manageable with how they're spread out across the season and with them being at home. And the biggest thing, in my opinion, they don't have to play themselves. So their schedule is going to be a bit easier just by that fact alone. They're one of the biggest giants in the country and in the SEC, obviously. So not having a team like Georgia on your schedule is going to make your season much more manageable, especially when you have an Alabama and a Texas on it. That's a huge plus in my opinion. And with that, let's look at Georgia's strengths this year. The first and most obvious strength on this team is going to be its coaching staff. Kirby Smart, two-time national championship, not much more needs to be said about him. Mike Bobo returns for his third season, a bit controversial as Georgia's offensive coordinator, especially with the folks down in Athens. He's a highly experienced coordinator in college sports, has been moderately successful in his recent time at Georgia. Could be a bit better, but we'll get into that in a bit. Defensive coordinator Glenn Schumann also returns in his second full season as Georgia's lone defensive coordinator. He's been with the team since 2016 when Kirby Smart took over. Definitely a head coach caliber coach, and they're going to have no problem getting the most out of their guys this year. We saw that last year with this team not being up to Georgia's standards, at least statistically, but that coaching staff really honed in and had its best season we can think of in recent memory outside of the national championship seasons, obviously. Got back to the SEC title game, won the SEC title. That coaching staff is the biggest strength probably on this whole team, and their second strength is going to be the defense. This point is going to wrap back in on the coaching point, and that this unit was good last year, but was only around 30th in the country overall, which is a testament to the coaching job that they did last year. And this year is going to be very similar. They're coming into 2025 losing a lot of production from last year's defense. They have a ton of talent coming up on that side, but they are a very young team all around, and especially on the defensive side of the ball. But I still think that the defense overall is going to be a strength for this season, mainly because the scheming and the development of that defensive staff is second to none in the country. And they do return some elite names and guys like KJ Bolden, Dalen Everett returning in the secondary, and a couple of key rotational pieces returning in the front seven. So in my opinion, there's not a lot to worry about on that side of the ball. And with our third strength of the video, it's going to be the receiver room. Oscar Delp returns at tight end. We know that's not a receiver, but he's going to be getting a lot of receptions for being Gunnar Stockton's security blanket. They also bring in Zachariah Branch from USC, and they also get Noah Thomas from Texas A&M, on top of returning guys like Dylan Bell, Colby Young, and London Humphreys from last year's team. Very, very deep and talented unit, almost maybe even too deep. Gonna be hard to get all those guys the ball, but that's definitely a good problem to have if you're Georgia, especially when you have a young quarterback. All the options in the world are never a bad thing. It just might lead to a couple transfers, a couple unhappy players if all those guys can't get the ball, which obviously they can't. And speaking of potential problems, let's look at some not good problems and get to this team's weaknesses for next year. The first and probably the most glaring weakness on this team, in my opinion, is the returning production overall. They rank 108th and 93rd in the country in returning offensive and defensive production for this year. But my biggest concern with that is the experience and depth in the two deep rotation. On both sides of the ball, I count around 13 to 15 guys who are going to be in the rotation that haven't been in the program longer than 2 seasons, which is a problem you can afford to have when you're afforded the roster talent a team like Georgia is going to have, but still not ideal for a team who has lived and died the past decade on elite depth and and elite attrition throughout the season. Could run into some problems late in the year if injuries become an issue. But as for our second and last weakness for this Georgia Bulldogs squad, we're going to take a look at the quarterback room. Now, I have to add a disclaimer just like I did in the Alabama video. This is more of a question mark than it is a weakness. Their options aren't necessarily bad, just probably not as good as they have been. I'm not sure how confident I am in saying either of them can lead this team to 10 or more regular season wins. Gunnar Stockton is the odds-on favorite before fall practice, and in his only start last season against Notre Dame, he looked fairly average to maybe a bit above average. 20 of 32 passing for 234 yards and a touchdown. Doesn't look that bad, but he had a real hard time pushing the ball down the field in that game, which handicapped that offense without a dominant rush offense to pair with it. A rush offense that should hopefully be much better with Nate Frazier returning, who was your best player at that position last season. And they add Josh McCray from Illinois, who is a high upside back in that room this year. But Georgia also has Ryan Puglisi, who was a top 10 quarterback in the 2024 cycle. He's got a great frame and a great arm to go along with it, but the question for him will obviously be the intangibles. Will he have the instinct? Is the pocket awareness what it should be for a starting SEC caliber quarterback? And are Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo going to be confident that he can deliver in big moments this season? We shall see, but with that, let's look at how Georgia's going to grade out for me this year. The offense is going to grade out at a 90 flat. We like the skill position talent. We like the O-line as well to be at the very least as good as it was last year. We even like the ground game a little bit more, still cautiously optimistic about that unit, but the quarterback situation just doesn't lend me any confidence. They could obviously prove me wrong, just like all of our last three previews, obviously, Alabama, Texas, and Ohio State, but I personally like all of those quarterback rooms a little bit more than I do Georgia's this year. And as for the defense, they're going to grade a bit higher at 92.5. This unit struggled a decent bit for Georgia standards last year, but overall, they're going to need to be a step or two better in the front seven and in the secondary before I feel justified in ranking the squad any higher. Next, let's look at special teams, a truly elite unit in all sense of the term. We haven't got to talk about them yet in this video. They're getting a 98 and A+ grade. Their kicker, Peyton Woodring, went 91% on 23 field goal attempts last year with a long of 55 elite. Their punter, Brett Thorson, averaged over 47 yards and 44 net yards per punt last season, both top 8 stats in the country, elite. And both of their coverage squads were also extremely affected last year, elite grade, elite unit, and speaking of elite, the coaching staff is getting the highest grade of this offseason so far at a 99. What is there to say about Coach Smart that hasn't already been said? Mike Bobo still has room to grow, but has been solid so far. And the only thing really keeping us from getting that full 100 is that offense, and that defense would like to take them a step further. Glenn Schumann, I think, has the opportunity to field an elite defense this year and really help bump up that grade to the final 100 grade if they don't leave, obviously. Schumann specifically is still new, so he has a lot of room to grow. Mike Bobo does as well, but Schumann especially. And I have faith it'll work out just fine for them. But as for their strength of schedule, the Bulldogs are going to grade out at a 97 flat. Really, the only saving grace for the schedule is the home slate and the fact that they don't play themselves, obviously. Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida, Texas, and Georgia Tech all on one schedule is brutal. And that brings the Georgia Bulldogs to an overall grade, the highest so far this offseason, 95.3. They've reached elite status. They are an elite team. Maybe not an elite roster, but easily an elite coaching staff. And with that being said, let's look at the predictions for this season. I predict Georgia's floor to be 9-3 this year. Pretty typical for a lot of these squads in the SEC. That would be them losing some combination of their 4 to 5 hardest games this year. Don't necessarily think that will happen, but with a question mark at quarterback, I believe this is on the table. And as for their ceiling, I personally don't think there's a team on this schedule that Georgia is incapable of beating this year. I've got them at 12-0 for their ceiling. Georgia, year in and year out, is going to be capable of this no matter if they have Aunt Judy at quarterback. That coaching staff and that roster is going to be capable of taking that team to the tallest heights in any given year. Which brings me to my final prediction. I have the Bulldogs Bulldogs slated at 10-2 on the year. I think they dropped the game to Texas, whose defense I like a little bit more, and Texas will be coming off a bye week into that game. And then I have the Bulldogs most likely dropping a game to either Florida or Georgia Tech at their neutral sites. I think they're still capable of a playoff push, or possibly even making the SEC title game with 2 losses like they did last year. Everything with the SEC is going to be up in the air with how loaded it is, with how many teams have quarterback question marks, and you can never really count Kirby Smart out, especially not in the SEC. But let me know what you think the Georgia Bulldogs record will be this year in the comments down below. And with that, thank you for watching. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy the video. It helps us out a lot, and we will see you in the next one.